Yo, what's up, everybody? Here I am in San Diego, California, and we're going to talk about my fight with Andre Mannaart, my fourth fight of my career. So enjoy, man. This is a big fight for me. Right on.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Yamatodamashii podcast. My name is James, and I'm joined again, of course, by Mr. Enson and Inoue. Enson, how are you doing today?
Good, man.
Good, 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 good. Well, we've done a couple of episodes on a few random topics. We did the Yakuza Road Rage episode, which was well received. We did the fan Q&A, which was great to hear everyone's questions. But today we're going to go back to your career. And we last time we had one of these career podcast episodes, we were talking about your fight with Ed the Cref. And before we jump into the next fight after that, I was just curious to know what the sort of media attention was after that fight, and whether your fame had started to increase a little bit.
Yeah, well, in when I fought Edo de Clef in Japan, it was after the fight. He was MMA was still really pretty brand new in Japan, and the fact that he was a European cage fighting champion, it uh, it kind of sparked a lot of talk. So I remember after that fight, there was a huge fighting magazine called Kakutogitsushi. So I noticed that fighting magazine actually went and had a big write up on me, and actually had a full color page of me mounting Edo de Clef. It was like a whole full color page. Oh no, what was it? Or was it the one that I had my hands raised in the air? That's the one. I had my hands raised in the air.
Wait,
So yeah, it was huge. It was like the cover. I had the cover of the magazine, so that was kind of huge. And
do
that's
you
at
remember?
the time when K1 was popular, and usually you have those type of fighters on the cover. But I got the cover shot on they call it Kakutogitsushi, one of the biggest magazines in Japan fighting.
That's really good. Do you remember where you were when you saw it for the first time?
I think it was a magazine. I mean not a magazine. It was a bookstore that we went to. All the
Oh,
bookstores carry the magazine, so every time after the fight, we go to the bookstore and check what kind of coverage we had.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Because by the Tokyo Dome, I always remember there's like a really like there was it's just closed, isn't it? But there was like this famous bookstore, and it used to have like the magazines outside the front.
Yep, the Tokyo Dome has the magazine shop right there, and it's like it has all the current magazines in there. Yeah.
Yeah, that must have been so cool though, just to sort of walk by it and suddenly see like this is you on, on the front cover of a magazine. Must have been a bit of a shock.
Yeah, that place has all the pro wrestling magazines, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That must be a cool feeling. But so in terms of this fight then, so Sayama matches you up against Andre Mannaart, and this is January 1996, and this is kind of where K1's becoming super super popular. And for those that don't know, Andre Mannaart was he was a well-established kickboxer. He'd had bouts with Ernesto Hus, Peter Ertz, some of the big names in K1 at that time. He was even in the 1994 World Grand Prix. But what was sort of the thinking behind the matchmaking of putting you in there with like an elite level striker?
I don't know. I guess Sayama got a hold of Andre Mannaart, got him to sign a contract. And I think although my striking wasn't up to par, I think Sayama knew that it was MMA. I could take him down and use my ground on him. So back in our day, the scene was you're either good at striking, you're good at ground, or you're good at wrestling. And nowadays, you know how everyone's good at everything. Back then, it was one or the other. So it was kind of a real a fight with clear strategy. Like Andre's going to want to keep me on the feet, and I'm going to want to take him to the ground. It's going to matter on who can execute their game plan. So yeah, so it was I don't know, for some reason in MMA, Edo de Clef would have been more established, but for some reason, because K1 was more famous and Andre had a bigger name, for me, even going into this fight, I felt like, oh, this is I'm finally fighting like a real fighter. Yeah. So I felt like, oh shit, this is like my real test.
How did you feel about your striking at that point in your career? Like, where did you feel that your level was at?
On a scale of 1 to 10, and Andre being at a 10, I think I was like a 3. I felt like I didn't have. It's not that I didn't have any striking whatsoever, but I didn't have. I mean, if they asked me to do a kickboxing fight with Andre, I probably wouldn't because I would know that he would outclass me, and it would be almost to to no merit to me. So yeah, so I mean, the fact that it's MMA, it kind of gave me that way to have a strategy to actually win a fight with someone who's a lot better than me in striking and a lot more experience.
Was there anything differently that you did for for this camp for training for such an elite level kickboxer? Was it? I mean, nowadays you hear about guys will bring in try and mirror the opponent, whether it's say like a similar size or try and bring in like maybe a big guy to sort of match that style. Was that something that sort of happened back in the day where they say, "Oh, let's bring in this kickboxer guy to sort of spar with"?
No, back in the day, we really didn't do that. Back in the day, it was more just concentrating on your strengths that you could use against your opponent's weaknesses. And like for instance, someone like Andre, my takedowns, and keeping someone on the ground. So we practice a lot of takedowns, and we practice a lot of me having someone on the ground and them trying to just stand up. Because keeping someone on the ground, if you don't have the right technique, can be real strenuous, can burn your stamina really fast.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, and you can see, we'll get to the fight in a minute, but you can see how you do exactly that and sort of keep them grounded for such a good amount of time. One of the things that you've mentioned in other podcasts that we've done is that sometimes you were sort of flying back and forth to Hawaii to do a lot of your training, as well as doing the training in Japan. Um, how, was that something that worked for you, to be honest? Just mixing it up, going to doing the different training from in the different locations in the world?
Yeah, I felt comfortable in Hawaii. I had the beaches, the temperature was better. I had Egan and Egan's guys in the Egan's gym to train with. So for me, it was a better training atmosphere. The thing that also helped was at the time Shuto was really supportive. So they would pay for my Hawaii trips. They would fly me in and out of Hawaii. They would cover my airplane ticket. So that helped out a lot too.
Yeah. Oh wow, that is really good of them to be able to do that. So, leading into this fight, as you're sort of backstage, again, you're the main event of the Shuto fight. It's in Korakuen Hall, so quite a lively crowd there as usual. Fans that are sort of used to would go. You probably have quite a lot of regular fans that would go, right? So that fans knew you from your other Shuto fights and the Valley Shuto fight. Um, what was how did the nerves compare to the other fights going into this one?
It's the same. I always had nerves. There was it was. I think I was so green in fighting it that the nerves were the same from the debut fight. It was still just as nerve wracking. Um, I don't think there's a fight that I ever didn't feel any nerves to the end of my career. So yeah, the nerves are there. There was it was a little more pressure for me because I felt that I was actually fighting a established fighter, a big name. He was well known in Japan. He was well known in the kickboxing scene. So back then, the bigger scene was the kickboxing scene. So it's like you're famous in K1. Well, what is this MMA thing? Or like back in the day when we fought MMA, we would tell them that I'm a fighter, and they ask, "Well, what do you fight?" I say, "Shuto." The first thing out of their mouths would be, "Oh, K1." So K1 was the huge thing that MMA wasn't. So it's
Yeah,
funny how it's the opposite now. Yeah, like UFC is huge, Glory is not as big. So
yeah,
it's kind of like the opposite now. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, when you look back at the sort of MMA landscape in Japan, obviously you had the Pancrase, Shuto, but you didn't have
So in
pride
a
at
way,
that
for
point,
me,
right?
it was like a big step up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
As far as the opponent that I'm fighting, it was a legit fighter.
yeah, yeah. You could tell he's like a trained athlete. You've been there with some recognizable names as well. So,
Yeah,
um,
he was a real recognizable name.
mm. So let's talk about the fight then. So, in terms of game plan, you must have been pretty happy with how you executed it, right? Because uh, immediately you guys obviously start on the feet, but straight away you sort of get backed up against the ropes and get the takedown.
Well,
Talk me
so
through it.
my whole strategy was um, not just shooting for the tackle because I knew he was probably watching me to tackle. So I wanted to first try and create the feeling that I was going to actually strike with him. So instead of shooting for the tackle right off, I was closing distance and pretty much getting into striking range. And all I was doing is I was waiting for that one big punch or that one big kick. Any type of a kick or a punch would be like the same type of movement. So I was just waiting for any type of huge movement, and I was just going to shoot in. So my whole idea was when we start, just keep closing the distance, closing the distance, to a point where he'd get so uncomfortable that he'd throw a punch, and that's when I was going to shoot. And it actually worked out perfect. As soon as he started throwing something, I closed the distance, pinned him on the ropes, and once someone like me that's been training MMA gets kickboxer in a clinch, their rule set doesn't allow takedowns, so they don't have any takedown defense. So as you see in the fight, the takedown was really simple. And for the idea we always have is whenever you get somebody that doesn't do any groundwork on the ground, they're going to be like a fish out of water. So they're going to have this little burst of energy probably. So my whole thing was when I take Andre down, which I planned to when I did, my whole thing was I was going to sit out the storm. So I thought he was going to go a little more crazy than he did and just start struggling and kicking and bucking. So my whole thing was, if you notice, when I took him down, I just made sure I established position. And
Yeah,
I just stayed flat, kept him flat.
yeah, you can see throughout the fight, it's like you're just super calm and composed, and it's almost like you're just sort of biding your time a little bit in terms of like your next move. Um, was that kind of was your thinking in the fight? Was there a point where you thought, I know when I'm gonna go for the submission when he sort of gets to this level of tiredness? Or
Yeah, I mean, doing jiu-jitsu, I've done so many hundreds of hours of groundwork. Once I got him to the ground, it was all a thing on instinct. So of course, in jiu-jitsu, when you do the ground, the whole idea is to advance position. So from one position, get to a better, to a point where the best position you're in is probably the best position to finish a fight. So when I took him down, I got lucky because he didn't know any, guard retention or anything. So when I took him down to the ground, right away, boom, side control. And from there, the next position you advance to is the mount. So I just made sure I controlled side control. And as I'm controlling side control, I could feel his energy. I could feel when he tried to bridge. I could feel when he wouldn't be able to lift his legs up to defend the mount. So once I felt that his energy was keeping his legs flat on the mat, I executed the mount and secured the mount. From there, securing the mount again, instead of striking or advancing positions, I made sure I established the mount, waiting for him to buck to start, twisting and turning. And I was going to wait till that storm weathered. And then when I did, of course, he was holding on to me. So the next step was to create distance so I could drop some strikes instead of laying down on him and hitting him with kind of half-ass punches like I did with Shigeta, my first fight. As you can see in that fight from the first fight, it's a whole different way. Because when I first got the mount in the first fight, I started just wailing wild punches and racquetball punches and whatever. But this time, what I did was I made sure I established position, and I made sure I sat up right, and I made sure I could drop more solid punches.
yeah,
So, that fight was It was one of those things that Andre never fought on the ground. So when I got him on the ground, he was just really like a fish out of water where I had my way with him. And I got the mount. And when I got the mount, I felt I had a lot of time. The round was still new. So I was picking my punches and throwing my punches. And I feel there was again, a mistake on the referee, the way they stopped it too fast. Cause I really didn't get to hit him that solid. And before I hit him maybe with one or two, and then I missed another one. And then the referee just had, I think it was just bad timing that he jumped in to stop it. And again, it's like Andre. Of course, Andre's kind of bummed because he didn't really get that damage. It was still going. It was just about to start.
Mhm.
And for me, I was bummed too because I spent all that time getting him down. I spent all that time securing position. I got right into the position on the mount where I could start hurting him, and the ref stops the fight. So
Yeah.
I think the ref did a bad job on timing and stopping the fight. He should have let it go more. The fans would have loved it. It would have been more convincing for Andre to know that he got defeated, and it would have been more satisfactory to me to be able to give him a lot more damage.
Yeah, no, the ref definitely did seem overly keen to sort of jump in, probably because he knew sort of kickboxer on the ground, it wasn't going to end too well, and you can tell that it's complete dominance at that point on the ground. It's interesting to hear you say, obviously, about looking back at your first fight and then looking back at this fight and then seeing the difference in just technique, just even from the way you sort of throw the punches. So it's cool. So if anyone has seen both the fights, how much you can see like your training and improvement paid off. So I mean, after the fight, you must have felt pretty good about the performance, right?
Yeah, I think as soon as the fight was over, I was more like it just didn't feel satisfying. I just felt like they just stopped it too soon. I felt incomplete. Like, damn, I didn't get to finish the fight. Looking back at hindsight, looking back at the video, I was really happy with the way I looked way more professional, I looked way more controlled. Punches looked a lot better on the ground. And it did seem like I knew what I was doing. I was more experienced. So, all in all, I felt really good about the improvement. Immediately after the fight, I felt a little bit of emptiness, like I didn't get that satisfaction of actually finishing the fight. So, yeah, it was a really good win because it was Andre Mannaart. And the interesting thing about that fight was what happened after that fight is, up until that fight, it was all about one more fight, one more fight, one more fight. And when I beat Andre, the feedback I got from it, the fact that he was an established K1 fighter, and people didn't really understand the fact that K1 doesn't have ground, so of course he's not going to be that good in the ground. It was like you beat Andre Mannaart, and it kind of got to me too, like holy shit, I just beat Andre Mannaart. So for me, regardless of his ground was good or bad or not, he was a very established fighter. So for me, put a little light bulb in my head, and I just kind of like, wow, more than just experience. Maybe I'm actually pretty good at this, and maybe I should further, my development and see how good I can actually get, and see how I'll fare with the best fighters in the world. And I had that little fire in me to challenge myself with the best fighters in the world.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that it was, it took you to get to 4-0 before you actually said, I'm going to make this like my profession now. Because before you'd always been sort of, I want to challenge myself. I want to, test my skills. But, it's interesting that it was Andre, you had so much respect for him as like an athlete to give you that,
So
when you
it's
beat him.
interesting because up until then, I felt like, I felt obligated to fight one more for Sayama.
Mhm.
They put me on the cover. I mean, they gave me a big write up. I gotta fight one more for the fans.
Mhm.
But the interesting thing is that this whole after this fight, it whole changed the whole momentum from I gotta fight for somebody else to I gotta start fighting for myself now. I want to test myself. I want to see how good I can fare with the best fighters in the world. Of course, I wasn't someone who was taking fighting for granted. I didn't go straight up from the beginning with no amateur fights and say, "Yeah, I want to see how good I am in the world." Of course, it was just about getting experience in the ring, fighting the anxiety. So I was actually looking at amateur rings, amateur, events. So I think it was a real legit change in thought process that was a very educated change. It wasn't like, oh, I think I'm tough now. I want to fight the best in the world. It took 4 fights for me to, you know, see what I can do, see my progress, see what type of fighters I'm fighting. And with all the fighters that I beat, I think it was a very legitimate decision to actually decide that, man, let me push this further, to take it a step further and see if I can mingle with the best in the world. So it was a really nice thing. Wasn't something that I planned. It just like a piece of puzzle just starting to fit together. My whole life is like that. I'm a very lucky person.
Couple of random observations just from watching back the fight on YouTube. The first thing that sort of made me chuckle a little bit is Egan, obviously in your corner, wearing this bright purple jacket. It feels like super 90s what he's wearing. Was there any significance to that? Was that something that was that like I don't know.
That was in back in the day, man. Those racquetball jerseys, man.
Okay, okay,
You
yeah,
know, it's funny because back in that day, I think it was 1996. You're as far back enough that you're really looking at a whole different change in dressing and hairstyles like that. So yeah, it was like, that's how long ago that was. That was actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
the top that Egan was wearing was cool.
Yeah, it looked cool to me. I was like, wow, you could tell, but it just made me think, this is 90s. Do you know what I mean? I bet he's not wearing it now.
No more of that.
Yeah, that's cool. And then the other thing is, obviously you do your post-fight interview, and then typically with these sorts of events, when they're filmed for DVDs and that sort of stuff, they show clips of backstage. There's a clip of you, and I'm guessing it's Sayama because he's wearing his tiger mask.
That wasn't Sayama. That was actually this guy. He was planning to be the 4th Tiger Mask.
Oh, okay.
So the reason why he was back there was was one of my main sparring partners.
Oh, no way. Okay, that's interesting.
He was more a bodybuilder, and as you know, pro wrestlers don't really need to know how to fight that well.
Yeah.
So he was just a bodybuilder dude that was, was pretty agile, where he could do a lot of flips and backdrops and stuff for pro wrestling. But he was just a body that was put in there to take a beating, and I beat him up every day, man. Beat him up real bad. He was a lot smaller than me too.
Yeah.
He'd had a lot of muscle compared to a Japanese person, but it's a lot smaller. And he took a beating. So,
Yeah. Tough guy. But no, that makes sense. I was thinking, why is the promoter of the event sort of just hanging out in his mask? I guess, that is a thing for some professional wrestlers, but it just, I thought I'd just double check whether that actually was Sayama in the mask.
Well, he was a 4th Tiger Mask.
Cool.
And nobody knew what he looked like. So he couldn't show his face.
Right. He's a
so those pro wrestlers, they take it serious, man. When they have identity to hide, they do it all the way through. He's even told me that he's actually picked up some fans that when they got to bed, they wanted him to keep his mask on. That's some freaky shit, man.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's mental. But yeah, no, that I think as far as your performances at that point, it's definitely your most sort of flawless performance. The other fights you could tell were a bit more of a challenge, whereas with Andre, I think it was just, as you say, you trained that skill set, you knew exactly what your game plan was, and you executed it. So
yeah, there was absolutely no damage. I took no damage in that fight.
What was the reaction backstage? Thinking of for your next fight, was everyone as buzzing as they were for some of the other fights?
Yeah, I think it was just a continuation of everything. I think a lot of people expected me to win,
Hmm.
and the buzz was continuing. Like, oh, he won again. Okay, who's next? Who's next? You know, so it was uh, it was a real exciting time because for me, it got me really excited. That okay, man, yeah, let's see what I can do. Who's next? You know, so it was a it was a real change in my mindset on me getting in the ring. So it was I think it was actually the beginning of my career that I have today. Until then, it was pretty much just one fight at a time.
Yeah, it's cool that you can sort of pinpoint the moment of when you felt like this is where I'm going. This is going
Yeah,
to be my
that
profession.
was the moment.
Mhm. Great. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up this episode. We want to thank you as always for doing this, and I think the fans will be super grateful again to hear what was going through your head during this fight. Any parting words before we sort of wrap this up?
No, nothing. I'm in San Diego now. We're UK and San Diego. We're trying to make it work a lot for you guys. So um, it's amazing, yeah, technology because we're across the world right now, and we don't know who else is watching it. People from another part of the world. So
Yeah.
appreciate everyone tuning in. Of course, again, any advice, any ideas, push in a comment, like and subscribe, and tell your friends all about it. We want to spread the word on the Yamatodamashii podcast. Thanks, James.
Great. Thanks, Enson, and we'll see you guys again soon.